So thanks for the invitation. I'm very glad to participate to this very interesting European project and presentations. So I'm working at the National Museum of Natural History. I'm working for now more than 15 years on endocrine disruption, and I am interested in food packaging and food contact chemicals that are found in the packaging. So I will try to give you what we know and what we designed as a strategy to decipher the activities of the different chemicals from the food containers. So you know that, so I'm sorry if you heard the things like 100 times during the day or during the the former presentations. So just to make the point that we are using a lot of plastics, we are in the Plastocene, even though it's not an official era that we live in. So we know that most of the plastics end up in nature, that we have what we see in the ocean are only 1%, but we are facing a very huge amount of plastics because we still need to make some progress on the recycling and perhaps on lowering our production. What I want also to stress is that we have two sides of plastic pollution. So we have the macro plastics, then you have the microplastics, you have the nanoplastics, and you have the additives. We are wondering if the microplastics are exhibiting an action by itself. We know that there is more physical, like with inflammation, local inflammations. For the nanoplastics, it's more on debate if you have a facility of entering. For both micro and nanoplastics, what is quite known now is that you may have additives that are there is a carrier effect. So these compounds can make and facilitate perhaps the intake of the compounds, other compounds, like, for example, pesticides, into some organisms. And what we worked on, it was more on the components and the additives, because most are known, not most, but some are known as endocrine disruptors. I'm sorry, it's in French, but the idea is that you may have different sources of contamination of plastics and also the additives. So by inhalation, but also via food or via drinking water, or even with the skin contact. So just that we don't know all the effects on health and perhaps also on environment. We know that there are different kind of plastics, you know that, so I won't go into much details, just to mention that you have some that are easily, and we know how to recycle them, like polyethylene terephthalate. Then you have some, the 7 is about the new plastics, like 3D plastics, 3D printing plastics, sorry, and the polycarbonates and other. What we know is that, in fact, additives from plastics can leach out from the plastic substrates. So it has been estimated that the cumulative release of plastic additives into surface and deep waters can range from 212 to 738 nanogram per gram for the polyethylene, and from 4.1 to 88 microgram per gram for PVC. And in this paper, the authors propose estimates like the chemical additives discharge is from 2.3 to 132 tons per year for PVC, and 0.4 to 3.4 tons per year for polyethylene. So it's not like it doesn't exist. You know that these additives, even though they are not accumulating, they are there, okay? And if you look specifically to food containers, so in this paper from last year, from the Food Packaging Forum team, they crossed different databases. So one database on the left is from the 12,000 chemicals that they are known to be intentionally added to food contained containers, and you have a new database that they made in the paper, where they identified some chemicals that were migrating from the food items, or they were identified from the container, sorry, in the food item, or they were identified from the food container with some simulant, so food simulants. And what they found out is that finally, most of these chemicals were not in the database of intentionally added substances. And so that was the first point, that most of the chemicals were not in the white list. And if they looked at different type of containers, they can show that most of the compounds, like 1975 compounds out of the almost 3,000 migrating from the food containers, were coming from plastics. And if you look at what kind of compounds, if in fact it was more phthalates, so DHP, DBP, or bisphenol A. And if you look at others, so not the highly represented, but some other compounds, you could see that there were perfluorinated alkyl substances that should not be there for some, but they were found in some of these food containers. So the question you may ask is, okay, you have a release, there is impregnation, so we are all with these chemicals, but does it really matter? What are the health problems, or are the effects proven on the endocrine disruption? So for the phthalates, you know that they can be found in the cosmetics, so they make the plastic softer. They can be found in cosmetics, shampoos, and medical devices. They are non-persistent, but we are all having some phthalates in quite big amounts, like it's most of the time it's 10 to the -7 molar, so it's around micromolar concentration, so it's quite high. And some are considered some substances of very high concern. The short chains of phthalates, so those who have a really short chain since 2017, but still they are commonly used. And it's not only a human problem, you know, you can find this micromolar concentration also in blue whales or in fin whales in Norwegian Arctic. So just to mention that it's something that it's common. So what are these endocrine disrupting effects of these additives, and how can we detect them? I just want to mention that the endocrine disruptors there are some characteristics they can find. It's not one category of compounds. They are in different categories, or in heavy metals, in synthesis hormones, meds, pesticides, cosmetics, and also flame retardants. And what we have is that there is not a systematic dose response. So it exists, those responses, but it's not always the case. You may have synergistic effects. You may have an accumulation, and you also, the time of exposure is very crucial, because hormones by themselves, they don't have the same effects during your whole life at the same moment. So one critical period of exposure is during the fetal to the baby. So you know this 1,000 days from the conception to the 2 years of the baby. So this is a crucial window of exposure to endocrine disruptors. And from a more legislative point of view, you have three criteria that had been defined in 2016 by the EU Commission. And those are the endocrine activity. So you have four modalities, so estrogen, androgen, thyroid, or steroids, so non-sexual steroids here. You should prove that the compound is exhibiting one endocrine activity. You should prove that there is an adverse effect, and you should also have some clues about a plausible link between the endocrine activity and this adverse effect. So the adverse effect is most of the time something that is leading to a disease, and the endocrine activity could be done with epidemiological. So the 1 to 3 link is done with epidemiology, but 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 are most of the time done in laboratories. The origin of the endocrine disruptors in 91, in fact, one of the person that showed the effects of a plastic compound on cell proliferation was Anna Soto. So she was showing that a plastic compound, a surfactant, nonyl phenol, that was added into some new tubes that were low binding. They were making the cells MCF7, so the cancer stem cells. They were making them proliferate as they were with no hormones. So if you look at the graph, you have a tube that was filled with medium and without hormone here. With hormone, you can see that you have a proliferation of cells. Here you have from the second graph, you can see that the old Corning tube was without hormone and with hormone. And then when she used the modified tube, she could see that you don't have to put any hormones. The nonyl phenol is making the cell proliferate. So that was the first clue that some plastic compounds, some compounds from the plastics could make the cells react as they do with hormones. You also have this paper from EHP paper in 2011 that showed the estrogenic activity of different monomers of the polymers. So here, for example, for the low density polyethylene, you can see that the ethylene by itself is having no toxicity and no estrogen activity in this paper. And for some others, like for example, the PETG, you can see that the dimethyl terephthalate, you can see an estrogen activity. For the polycarbonate and the bisphenol A, you could see this estrogen activity. So, but here you can make also the point that you have a common and a plastic and a food container that has also multiple additives. And as I showed you with the former slide on the multiple compounds that can be released and they were not in the whitelist, it's difficult to test and to have the effect of a globality. So for the bisphenol A, just to make the point, we know there was a ban to use in baby bottles. So in 2008 in California, in Canada, in 2010 in France, and then in Europe, I think now it's everywhere that it's banned for baby bottles. In 2012 in France, there was the vote to ban it in food containers, and this vote was adopted. And since January 2015, there's no BPA in food containers in France. And in 2023, so this year, HEFSA set the new tolerable daily intake, to 0.2 nanogram per kilo per day, and it was formerly at 4 microgram per kilo per day. So basically, you could find some bisphenol A also in dental sealants and in second-hand products. For the bisphenol A, it's interesting to notice that the estrogenic effect was the first synthesis was done to make this estrogenic activity. So here is the original paper for 36 from Charles Dodds, where you can see that BPA and PPF has 100% activity on this rat nucleus testing. So it was rediscovered in the 70s for this plastic and polymerization properties, but originally it was an estrogenic compound. And for the phthalates, it's more known that it's, that there is this anogenital distance that you can measure in boys or in girls. The anogenital distance is greater in boys. Because you measure between the scrotum and the anus. And what you could see is that there was a distinction and an association in boys with a decrease of this anogenital distance with the increase of phthalate concentration. Sorry. So what about food containers? I think you probably seen that, but for food contact materials or food additives, the fact is that you don't have any definition on endocrine disruption, because the endocrine disruptors are defined for the plant protection products, for biocides, and for the medical devices, but not really for food contact materials. So there is no guidance, there are no test requirements, and even though there would be required, in fact, the tests are insufficient in terms of specificity to address some endocrine disrupting effect. If you look at some studies that have investigated the effects of different food containers and plastic containers on activity, this paper from 2019 showed that they were picking up different products, from different kind of plastics, and they were either food contact material or not, and they were chosen for the high consumption products based on their share in the municipal waste. So they were grabbed, and then they were cut into pieces, dissolved in one solvent, and then they were put on some different assays. So you had microtox assays, so it's a toxicological assay. You have another assay on toxicology, and then you had this yeast estrogenic screen, or yeast anti-androgenic screen, sorry. So yes, and you could see that, for example, for the control, so you have no activity, and for the high low density polyethylene, it's okay. But for some some items, it's 1, 2, 3. There corresponds to the 1, 2, 3, 4 here, the different kind of plastics, and it was quite interesting to notice that there were not always so the heats were not that they were for non-food chemical use. In fact, there could be positives and for food contact materials, so there were no real correlation with that. And you could see that the PLA, so the new kind of plastics, and the PVC were making the most hits and the percentage of activity, so either on the anti-androgenicity, but also on microtoxicity. They did the same kind of exercise with the new kind of plastics, in 2021. And so there was the bio-based polyethylene, this plant-based cellulose, bamboos, etc. And you could see that, again, the cellulose or on the same kind of assays, there were having some hits. So it's not that you have every time something that is wrong with the food container or in terms of activity, but it just shows that in fact we perhaps have not the good assays to look for them. So we know that there is an advantage of the plastic food container, because it's dispensable. So you use it, you don't have to wash it. So it's light. When you are in a restaurant and, in the French canteens, we are using these plastic things, or even in the hospitals, you are using these big food containers and plastics. And this should be avoided and banned in 2025. At least in France. You heard about just before about all the things that are being made in Europe to ban the single-use plastics. And so the fact is that we are facing a lack of legislation on food containers on endocrine disruption, because what is looked for is some chemicals. Okay, so you have to look for example, in polystyrene, you look for the styrene and a few additives that are on the list of the people that have to look for that. And but you can't really have an exhaustive view of the activity of that. So what we tried to do, it was a project that is founded by the French National Agency of Research, so the ANR. And we asked the question about the food container substitutive, because if you ban plastic, What what people they are tempted to do is to replace something with something that is new and that looks very, very promising. We did that with bisphenol A and bisphenol F and bisphenol S, so it was a regrettable substitution, and we wanted that this plastic ban in the Catherine or in the hospitals, why not just do it again? And so what we decided to do is that we were having 16 food containers types, like propylene in cellulose based, stainless steel and glass. So these were kind of controls. And what we wanted to do is to put some two food stimulants, the acid acetic at 3% and the vegetable oil, so it's sunflower oil, with a maximum usage of 120 degrees with a realistic contact time of 2 hours. We were dividing the work into 4 work packages. The main one and the first one was the extraction and the concentration. You will understand why after. So the idea is that we wanted to use the food stimulants as it's currently done, but we wanted to address all the chemicals that are migrating from these food containers on a biological system. But to make it compatible with biology and physiology, you can't put sunflower oil, on fish, on cells, or on a tadpole. So it needed a step of concentrating the chemicals that were migrating, and then with the possibility of re-diluting them to make them at the concentration that we are facing in human when we are eating this food with the chemicals that have been migrating from the food containers. We wanted to address and to test at the real concentration. So the work was divided into cell. So the INSERM was looking at the different food containers, concentrate, rediluting it on cells, expressing either thyroid hormone receptors, estrogen receptors, androgen receptors, and more hepatic receptors. We had the Toxalim in Toulouse that is doing the metabolomics. So on HEPA-RG cells, they are doing some metabolomics, so exposed with diluted food stimulants, this thing. We are doing the thyroid activity, and a company, Laboratoire Washfrog, is doing the estrogenic and androgenic assay. And then we have also a transcriptomic aspect that could link with what we see. So yeah, this is okay. So the first thing was to do the extraction and the concentration steps. So what we did is to choose 94 reference substances. So like monomers, flavor, additives, solvents, degradation products, plastifiers, antioxidants, alkene, alkane, and some ink components, etc. So to these, we knew them, so we could follow them and look at the ratio of what you put at the beginning and what you have at the end. So when you just try to evaporate these 94 compounds in acid acetic, and so you make the acid acetic 3% in your food container, then you do these 2 hours at 120 degrees, then you take back your 2 liters and then try to concentrate. With evaporation, doesn't work, because when you put 100% of your 94 reference compounds, you only have at the end 10%. So finally, I make it short, but the idea is that we found that the use of a solvent, methyl was okay, but it's not really user friendly. And so the best was to use an SPE cartridge, so the PPL one. What we obtain with the evaporation, so it was impossible, and the liquid extraction was okay. So this is what we did. It maximized the extraction of organic substances and minimizing oil extraction. So that was good. For the sunflower oil, what we did was the same kind of thing. So it's the LNE, the Laboratoire National Laboratory of Metrology and Assay, and this is Cédric Liato who did the work. It was shown that you had an acetonitrile methanol co-use. It was okay for the number and the percentage of substances that you can have at the end when you put the sunflower oil and then the concentration. And so the final parameters for two were that we used a column for the acid acetic or the dichloromethanol and methanol elution. And we had the concentration factor of theoretically it was 500, but finally we are using a 300. But for the sunflower oil, it was shown that we can reach 600 times concentrates. So to make it clear, we had 100, for example, 100 substances after the exposure of my food simulant in the food container. And after that, we obtained more than 70%, so 70 compounds that were not in 1 liter, but in 3 milliliters. So that makes the point, in fact, because you 300 microliters. Sorry, it really make possible to test on biology. So this is what we wanted to do. And so I will just show you what are some results of what we've done with the estrogen, alpha, beta, androgen. So that was done by Patrick Balaguer in Montpellier, and he's tested that. There's no big results. There's no hit on to say that there is precisely some containers that are more prone to activate estrogen and androgen or etc. What we did secondly was to use this assay. So it's an OECD validated assay, so XITA, so Xenopus eleuterothyroid assay. The principle is this one. You are putting some so food simulant concentrated, rediluted in the well of a 6-well plate. Here you can see that the tadpoles from Xenopus levis are transgenic, meaning that when you put some thyroid hormone in the water, they are expressing the fluorescence in their heads. And you can quantify this fluorescence automatically or from pictures after 3 days. And what you can see is also that when you have some compounds, so endocrine disrupting compound that are lowering the effect of T3, you can see it directly. So what we obtained with different food simulants here, you can see that they were coded. So with acetic acid, we had 1 and 2 that were borderline significant that were exhibiting more fluorescence than the T3 alone. So here you have no hormone. You put some hormones, you have an induction of the fluorescence, and when you put the hormone plus the extract of the food containers, you can different food containers, you can see that you have some effects. Here, I cannot say from now if what are the compounds that are making the effect. I don't have the possibility to do that, but it's possible to do it in a second time. I won't show you any results on that, sorry, but to show you another OECD assay, so it's the reactive assay. The principle is the same. They are transgenic medaca. So this is done by Laboratoire Watchfrog, where they are exposing the food simulant to this line of medaca. You can see that when you have a fry that is exposed to Evian, there is no fluorescence. When you expose these fries to testosterone, that is an aromatized estrogen, you can androgen. So you can see here that the testosterone can be aromatized by the aromatase, and that the estradiol is binding the estrogen receptors that binds the DNA on the regulatory elements before the GFP, and you can see GFP. So if you put a testosterone, so an androgen that is aromatized, or if you put an estrogen, you can see fluorescence. What they obtained with the different food simulants, so the food containers, they were exactly the same. You can see that you have the control here. you have the dose response of the ethinylestradiol, so an estrogen. You can see that the more you put ethinylestradiol, the more fluorescence you've got. You can see also here in green the testosterone. If you put testosterone at this concentration, you have a significant increase of fluorescence. If you put testosterone plus the ethinylestradiol, so you can see that you have fluorescence. But if you put testosterone plus something that blocks the aromatase, you don't have any fluorescence. So, having said that, when you put the food container chemicals extracted from the food, the chemicals extracted from the food containers, sorry, you see nothing. When you put that with the testosterone, so there is no estrogenic activity. This is what that means. But if you put it with testosterone, you can see that some are giving some estrogenic activity. So meaning that you could have some not a direct effect, but perhaps something that could make the testosterone more aromatized, or a synergistic effect. So to make the end of my talk, just to make you an overview, some cellulose-based we could quantify the number of molecules released. You can see that you had some cellulose-based containers that were only releasing and leaching 2 chemicals. We see no in vitro effects, but then an estrogenic effect with testosterone, and nothing with androgenic or nothing with thyroid. Some others, cellulose-based, 14 compounds, and we see estrogenic, androgenic, and also thyroid effects. We could see that for some stainless steel, but it was only the first use of the stainless steel, so no wash. And when we did that after washing them twice, we had no effect anymore. But we have at the first wash, we could see some androgenic effect. And you can see that the worst was the cellulose with liner. And something that was quite clean was the polypropylene, but it was one reference. So to make the conclusion, okay, we don't look in the current standards to the biological activity. We could add these kind of things, in order to make the food containers safer. And in terms of looking for new food containers, it could be also something that could be added in the strategy. The results obtained on the biological activity, so induced by molecules migrating from nitrates, show that only glass, 1 pp with polypropylene, and 1 stainless steel tray were free of activity. And yeah, I think that's it. I want to thank especially the people and collaborators of this work, and thanks for your attention. If you have any question, I would be pleased to have them.